Great. Thank you all so much again. I just appreciate the energy that we're bringing into these sessions with us. Be sure to have your questions queued up here. I'm just going to shout out our sponsors. I'll introduce Dr. Carla Shalaby, and we'll get going here. So, of course, I have to shout out our first sponsor, Cortico. Who's our transcription partner. They use the Fora app to facilitate small group conversations based on their lived experiences. Combining AI and human listening, Fora helps organizations understand and utilize these discussions for public dialogue and decision-making, offering authenticity, nuance, and transparency beyond what the usual surveys and focus groups can provide. And of course, Cass is in the house with us here today. That's awesome. Shout out to the Minor Collective, a community movement to reimagine school, their thought sanctuary, which you can actually participate in tonight from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, is a curated space for educators to joyfully and safely generate practical, dream-based ideas. They can connect, share ideas, stay curious, and have fun. I'm so looking forward to that both today in the evening and tomorrow evening as well to help close out our conference. And then, of course, the STEMpunks, a close collaborator with HRP. We had Ryan in a session yesterday. He's been big on the Discord, so huge shout out to Ryan Boren. And STEMpunks is dedicated to creating an inclusive world for neurodivergent and disabled individuals. They challenge traditional systems, advocate for accessibility, and promote supportive community. Their innovative approach combines direct support, advocacy, and education to drive change in public perception and policy. And finally, the reason why we're gathered here this morning for Dr. Carla Shalaby, dedicated to education as a practice of freedom, focusing on critical pedagogy and literacy, democratic classroom management, and the role of teaching in social justice. She's held significant educational roles as director positions at Brown and Wesley College, began her career teaching in New Jersey, currently, as we learned, at the University of Michigan, which is awesome. And Shalaby holds advanced degrees in education, the author of Troublemakers, which I cannot recommend enough, world-changing book for me, Lessons in Freedom from Young Children at School. So thank you so much, Carla, for joining us today.
I'm so glad and lucky to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm browsing the chat here. If there's anybody who wants to, I know, no pressure, Mason. You jumped in as when I was made the call yesterday. If anybody wants to jump in to raise hands, you can do that. Feel free to ask your questions in the chat. He's there. Oh, no. It was a fake out. Or you got it, Mason. Go ahead.
No, I got it. It's funny you mentioned that because I actually did have like a two combo question.
Sure.
The first one was shorter, which is I loved those 12 posters you had of like the self-accountability skills. Is there anywhere that I could like get those for my own classroom?
They are free. Anybody can have them. They're in a Google link, which I will, I don't know, send to you, Nick, and you can post it on Discord, or you, Chris. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Send it our way. We'll make sure it gets out there for sure.
Yes.
Awesome. The second question I had was revolving around the fact that you're kind of urging people to not be cops in the classroom really resonated with me because that was something I struggled a lot with, like how to manage behavior and feeling like a law enforcer in the classroom, which I really did not like. And there was a situation in the classroom that I've mentioned a couple times that was kind of ongoing throughout last school year where I had one student who was on an IEP plan and had, I forget exactly what it was, but when in a large group setting, was like physically unable to stop himself from kind of like blurting out these really loud, disruptive, and often offensive things, but was like a totally different person in like a one-on-one setting and was willing to engage in work. But in that same large group setting, there was a student who really, really needed peace and quiet to be able to focus. So how would you approach a situation like that with kind of this restorative and accountability-based framework?
Mm-hmm. You know, I'm sure every one of us has a story or an example of a time when it seemed like there was no way out, right? Seemed like it was an impossible situation. And almost every time I'm in a space of giving a talk or these Q&A sessions, that's like the number one first thing, right? Is like, well, I had this one kid, and what about this one kid, right? Or, oh, but I had this one situation, right? So I'm going to answer it one time for everyone who wants to bring up a particular scenario, right? Which I totally respect. And I will also say two things about that. One is that the goal is never for any of it to be like 100% the world we want. The goal is for us to model and try to practice how we get unstuck in very sticky situations. What you've named is such a useful, sticky situation for which there is probably no absolute right answer. And so what would it mean what could we do with kids to engage them in some kind of practice that would help us figure out what to do about an impossible situation like that, right? So to shift our mindset away from what's the best way to solve this problem, and even what's the best way to be value aligned in how I solve this problem, toward how do I facilitate the practice of a process to help us name this, figure out what the heck we might do about it, have ongoing conversations about what we might try and how those attempts went, right? And ultimately also be honest that in many situations, the bottom line is that this is not a scenario where school is set up for the success, right? Success. If this kid was in school in a one-on-one setting, they'd be great. If this kid was in school with a 1-on-4 setting with 3 kids who were super able to cope with that, right? So it's two things. One, remembering that still and always the problem is not that child and the particular needs that that child has, but the context that child is forced to be in, which in no kind of way serves their needs and makes it so that we are now in shared space in a deeply inconvenient way, right? And that's just the reality of it. It's just like a very inconvenient situation. These two people should not choose to share space, and yet here we are. And if there is no choice but to share space for this year, our best attempt is like, what do we want to model and practice for kids about how we're going to get better at sharing space? Is it going to be a conflict ongoing? Yeah, probably for the whole school year. Does it have to be every single day and unpleasant at every turn? No, it does not have to be, right? So every time there's an example of a particularly challenging child situation, combination of people, I do those two things back to back. One, think, what would the environment be that actually serves this child, and how much is it not this child's fault that this is not that environment, right? So recognizing that there's nothing broken or wrong with either child in that situation. The thing that's broken and wrong is that we are so constrained in the learning environments that are available to children. But given that, what can we do together as a shared space community to figure out our best attempt at something that's going to be inclusive, something that's going to name very honestly what all of our needs are, and how we're going to get close to trying to meet those? What kind of compromises involved? What kind of sacrifices involved? What do you want to teach kids about how to be in the world together with those kind of shared space challenges? And how do we practice that together, even though it might be, a hellish enterprise the whole year, beginning to end, and it may never get solved? That's good and okay, because it's not whether they are able to get along at the end, it's what all of the kids have had a chance to practice and all of the skill building that's happened in what they've seen through your model. That's where a different world becomes possible, in just the practice and the struggle, not in the result or the outcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Awesome.
May I jump in, Nick?
Oh, yeah, go ahead. I didn't see you.
Yeah. Hey, I'm wearing my Iowa shirt just for you, man. I loved your keynote, and I want to see if we can jump from Mason's question, which is a micro question of a specific example, and zoom out. I'm the host of a podcast, and I did an episode with someone in Kansas City who shared a story with me about how the district had imposed a rule that no kid could have their head down on a desk because that was evidence of disengagement. And the moving story that she shared with me was of tapping a kid on the shoulder who had his head down on the desk and him kind of exploding at her. And that it was a very traumatic situation, but one that she went back to and apologized to this kid, which her peers were kind of shocked that she would do that. And that began a relationship. So I think my question has to do with you zoom up to that systems level and you're trying to work in an environment where something like this is in place, do not have your head down on the desk. I wonder what you think about that, just your thoughts about systems like that. And yeah.
Thank you so much for that story. There's so much to lift from that story, but that small moment is how we make a better world, right? It's like, it's back to Adrian Brown's, that small is everything, right? You may think that interaction is not intervening on that system, but it's 100% intervening on that system, and not just for that kid, but for all the other kids who watch that apology.
Yeah.
And what a wild world to imagine that we could shock our colleagues by apologizing to someone else we share space with when we make a mistake, right? That teachers so rarely apologize when they make so many mistakes. They make as many mistakes as any person in that room. But how much power or authority you're suggested to be handing over by like making yourself in right relation with other human beings and honoring that with kids, right? So that is to say, again, it's making right by that child, but I just again and again say the witness of every other young person in that room seeing that apology means every other young person in that room learned, oh, there's a grown-up in here who doesn't think that rule is fair. There's just one person in this space who doesn't think that is a reasonable or even remotely, measured, sane. That's a ridiculous rule, right?
Yeah.
But kids, when all the grownups are in agreement, then that when they're seeing that all the grownups are in agreement with something that kids know to be ridiculous, that's very destabilizing for young people. And so for anybody, but especially for young people. And so I think that is a major intervention on a system to just do otherwise. Now, does it mean you can continue to work in a school where your values are in total misalignment with it? No. You might not be able to continue to work there. Schools that have many of those kinds of policies should suffer from not being able to find people to work there. That should be how that system changes, right? Is that there are enough teachers who say, absolutely not, I'm not going to interact with kids in that way. That's ridiculous and inhumane. So I don't know, I think I really, and especially as I've gotten older, this is so different than who I was as a 22-year-old like teacher starting out, but I just think small is everything, small is big, right? So I used to be a person who would like go complain to whoever was like the highest up about the ridiculousness of that rule, right? And of course, then nobody liked me, right? Who had any power over me? And that was difficult, right? And rude and stubborn and all of these things. And so instead, I could just do whatever the heck I wanted with the kids that I had in front of me, knowing that my intervention is not on this school right now. My intervention is on young people who are going to grow up different. And they're going to go out and do whatever the things are that they do. Maybe they work in schools, maybe they don't. Maybe they just be in relationship with other people in ways that don't ever try to control bodies. Maybe they think about consent. Maybe they think about what inclusion means, right? So I think it's an intervention to play the long game and to model and practice something different with kids rather than fix the situation you're in immediately right now. And so when I'm in a school that has a policy I cannot abide in the moment, I try to think about modeling for kids how I'm going to navigate that policy, naming explicitly for them that I don't like it, telling them exactly why, and explaining to them that perhaps when they move into other spaces like gym or recess or whatever, this rule is going to be enforced. And you're going to have to figure out how we're going to deal with the enforcement of that rule in other spaces. For the time that we're here with me, we're not going to enforce that rule. And here are all the reasons why. And what I hope is not to then change the rule necessarily, but to change young people's understanding of what that rule is doing to them, so they don't take for granted that that's an appropriate way to be treated. I don't want them to learn that that's everyday or normal or regular to have their bodies, regulated in such a severe manner. But I'm always playing the long game, and kind of, I think I've in large part given up on changing adults, and I put my energy in what can I model and practice with kids that they might grow into different adults.
Yeah, that's awesome. I realized as I was having this conversation with her that this was a pivotal moment in her life, because she realized that she had opened a door to story, and that this kid's story actually included a lot of the things that we hear now about working a second job and so on. There were all of these reasons. And
right? Yeah, duh.
yeah, the
I mean,
pivot.
and that's the thing is,
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
always kids are reasonable, right?
right.
People are reasonable. They do things that to us do not look reasoned, do not look measured. It's very easy to dismiss what young people do as youthful and not thinking it through. In fact, they're usually quite reasonable. They have reasons for all of the things that they do, and they have chosen the strategy that they think is most available to them at that moment, either because they don't know of other strategies or because they're having some kind of response, all of those things. So yeah, I believe in changing behaviors that are undesirable. I don't think putting your head down is one of them, but that aside, there are other behaviors I do think are undesirable: throwing chairs, hitting people, spitting, biting, leaving your garbage out, right? These are all undesirable behaviors. I'm all for changing those. I'm all for working on how we move toward being better without the use of punishment, shame, control, policing, exclusion, humiliation, strategies that I don't want modeled for our kids.
Yeah. Thank you.
Now, Lizzie, did you bail on your question? Did it get addressed there, or do you want to come back to it?
I'd love to ask Carla a question about something you just said. So you said, which I don't necessarily believe based on your teachings, that you've given up on adults. And I currently am working as an instructional coach, which and I work in a high school, which I feel like the adults are just young adults, and the adults in charge are older young adults. So how do you, or have you given up on working with those types of people? And I think, and I've been trying to figure out how to utilize sort of modeling love with adults, and that the long game is long with adults. And so what are your thoughts around that? Do you have?
I hate your question. I hate this question because I really don't know. I don't know. I guess everybody has his own proximal development, right? Whatever their age. So it's not to be ageist, right? It's not to be like, oh, adults. It's just that I don't prefer to work with them for lots of reasons. First of all, anyway, I am just not well suited for work with adults because I am a little bit rude. I am a little bit irritable. I am pretty short, right? These are things kids don't mind, but they are things that adults, I just have to be so careful. It just takes a lot of work for me to not be mean, right? But it takes no work for me to not be mean to children. So honestly, my strategy for working with the toughest adults is to imagine them as children. Like, this is actually what I do, is like, I'm going to pretend that you're in 5th grade. And it's not, again, to be condescending. It's to be graceful, right? I don't have the same, I don't personally hold the same grace for adults that I hold for children. It's just who I am. It's probably a flaw, but it is how I am. So certainly there are some adults that I don't mind working with, but not many. I don't know. I think there are different theories of change. Of course, I know that adults, especially in a school, make certain things possible or impossible for young people. They just have so much power that I can't avoid having to do the kind of work that you do, right? So of course I have to do coaching, and that, you know, I do, my work is about everyday embedded coaching in a school of new teachers, right? So I support teachers in their first 3 years at a regular Detroit public school, and they get like embedded. So they're adults in some way, but really they're at a kind of a developmental stage. And I don't mean in terms of age, but I mean in terms of educator development, that for me feels like I can work with that. Right. So I think I do have I don't want to tell you all the analysis that I do in like making an assessment of like, is this a person where I feel like we're in the window of working together, or we're not in the window of working together. And I do just want to be honest, like there's people who are just very, very differently value aligned, and there is no reason for me to have a conversation with those people. And it's not to be exclusive or, you know, it's not a boundary for my well-being. It's not that. It's just like, we live on different planes. I don't want to expend a lot of energy in a direction that is not fertile for me. And so I won't. But it's like this group of people are I can take for granted some sense of a zone of proximal development, because they've come to a shared space that has a certain kind of value, right? And so that I already know there's going to be some possibility of connection. But do I take talks where I'm working like all with district superintendents who I don't know, or who are no, you know, who are mandated to be there, or nope, not doing that. Right. That's not going to be happy for me or for them. Right. So my theory of change is bottom up. Kids, families, teachers are my primary points of intervention, because I don't believe change comes from the top. It generally does not flow from the top. So I try to act on that. But, you know, I don't know how you think about it, Lizzie, but I just don't want to spend my whole life working with adults.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. I think I'm going to figure out how to do a little bit of both. But thank you.
Awesome. Cass, you're up.
Hey, Carla. This is so fun, by the way. We just got back from vacation, so this is my first day digging in live. So happy to do it with Carla and friends. So we were watching your keynote last night, and I'm really in love with this idea of like, we keep us safe as like an alternate way of like helping people understand what it is we're actually trying to do. And I'm also just thinking about the grownups in the school community and their wherewithal. Speaking of grownups and Lizzie's question, their wherewithal and their intuitive senses and their literal like ideological framework they have in their mind for how school is supposed to go and how kids are supposed to be and like what their role is in that process. And so speaking of the longing of, I've been thinking a lot about like, what does it mean for grownups to get into school earlier on in their careers to understand like, you know, if a kid is dysregulated in school, like why might that be happening? And what is my role in mitigating this, whatever crisis might go on? And recently I've started to work with some child therapists to help my own self understand what's going on with kids. And I'm mindful of how much I don't know, or like I have yet to learn, right? And so for example, like I learned about interoception, right? Like this idea of like understanding like that you're hungry, or like what you're like understanding on a deep level what your body needs, like on a sense level. And like that's not something you learn in teacher education, right? Like I'm 42 years old and I'm just now learning about this like really, you know, cool information that would have helped me so much in the classroom. And luckily, like I had powerful teams. And I remember like a kid was dysregulated, and this social worker that I was good friends with gave them a beanbag chair to chew on, and it like changed like the whole experience. And so I'm just wondering, as somebody, you know, lots of experience in school, you're also like, you know, working in teacher preparation at some point in your life, I know, like, in what ways do you think we might support one another in helping people earlier on, like know these really powerful bodies of information that can change the way we interact with young people, like beyond the curriculum, like changing our interactions or our perception of what's happening with a child, rather than just assuming like, this kid is dysregulated, like let me remove all the kids from the classroom, rather than see them as like, oh, this kid might be sweaty and hungry, like let's get them a snack, right?
Yeah, it's
Sorry, that was a lot.
No, it wasn't. It was very clear. I'm gonna give you like one answer and then one secret strategy that I've been trying out, but it is like, it has some, anyway. First answer is like going back to the story of, you know, that, what is this name, Josh shared about that, you know, that moment of apology. Like, you hope that a teacher has one moment like that, some point, like that some opening, some crack of an opening happens where the teacher is able to say, like, this one interaction really fundamentally shifted how I think about the behaviors that kids are bringing to school. I hear that a version of that a lot, even from some teachers who I would consider like very stubbornly resistant to any of the ideas that I share. Like, one human moment with a kid like that is often enough to shift, and they sometimes just happen by accident. And so you kind of pray for, you know, to the goddesses or whoever you may or may not pray to, that they have one pivotal moment, right? So it's luck. It's a luck strategy, right? My secret strategy, which I think has been so useful, but so many things have to be in, like, you have to have such a strange position for this to be possible. But because I work in a school right now where I'm supporting teachers, but I am in a school, we actually use our curriculum with kids as a secret strategy for teaching teachers. So clear example. Social studies unit for kindergarten is around disability justice, right? And so kids learn about bodies. Every body is somebody, is the theme of the kindergarten social studies and science, right? And so they study physical body, right? Body positivity, consent, diversity of skin color, diversity of like physical needs, right? So just body. And then they study like what happens when bodies don't get what they need, right? So that they're thinking about and toward access to food and food justice, right? And all of it is place-based here with a focus on the city of Detroit and what people in the city of Detroit are doing to ensure what bodies need. But there are whole sections of learning around the relationship between what you eat and how you feel, right? Or your moods and what they might mean you need physically in your, right? How do you calm yourself? What kinds of signals does your body give you that you're not well? And what do you do to bring your body down, to like convince and help kids have actual strategies for recognizing what's happening in their bodies? And like, right, in the process of teaching and delivering this unit, the number of kindergarten teachers who I have who are like, okay, I am benefiting from that, right? Like, they can't help but admit they're learning new things, and that kids' wisdom around those things, and that kids will then be like, you seem a little bit irritable. Are you hungry? Do you need a snack? Like, my teenagers do this to me and I don't love it. I don't love it at all. When they're like, are you a little tired today? Right? Don't love it. But I'm like, maybe I am a little tired too. You know, like it's a back and forth, and it's kind of a more shared power. And so in a number of different ways, we are thinking, right, okay, so a second example, second grade, our unit is on expression. And we have a whole unit on behavior as a form of expression, teaching second graders that behavior is a form of communication, is a form of expression. And we teach second graders the very things that I teach teachers in teacher ed, or used to, right, when I wasn't embedded in a school. So that it's meeting two goals. One, we have second graders who are coming up with that knowledge and information so that we don't have adults who are unskilled in understanding that every behavior is an expression of some kind, and trying to listen rather than talk back or end that form of expression or silence that form of expression. That is as beneficial to the educator. So every social studies and science unit, I'm simultaneously thinking, what is the world that I want for kids to practice skills in, and how are teachers going to benefit from practicing these skills that we have never been offered alongside kids who are quite expert in it, and really simultaneously evens out the power dynamic when going through that learning, because neither side really is well practiced in most of these skills. And so they are legitimately learning together, which I think also addresses some of the classroom management power struggles that I'm seeing by just like making the dynamic more even. So I could go through the examples of every grade level, but every grade level was designed with that intention and hope in mind of simultaneously intervening on teachers and supporting kids to be better adults than we've had the chance to be.
Thank you, Carla.
Awesome. Sarah, go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you so much for being here with us. I a little bit rambly in the beginning. What I really appreciate what I'm hearing is you're creating that space for adjacency, right? You're not directly saying, I saw you, or this is a concern. Like, you are creating the space, it sounds like, for teachers to begin to see themselves and see echoes of experiences that we have had in schools and in life, right? In this academic way, where there's kind of that space for who's there and who's ready to become that we us. I really appreciated your language around your word mind this, mind that. I hear a lot of the restorative PBIS coming together, and this idea of minding, your language also when I was so I think, like what Cass was saying, I learned probably more about education when my child was getting early intervention services than I have ever, like Michelle Garcia Winner's work, right? Like all of it. Like, I learned more. And so my teaching certification lapsed, and I had to figure out how to get it back. And there was a portfolio option that no one knew about where you can write all the things you learned. And I locked myself in a room for like a weekend, and I wrote it all up and was like, this is what I wish I'd had in teacher ed, right? All of those pieces. And Becky Bailey's conscious discipline. It's my job to keep you safe. It's your job to help me keep it that way. I felt I heard her words and your words kind of coming together. And I wondered if you can speak a little bit to that idea of how you frame minding and how that's, and just exploring how that's different from saying, watch, pay attention to. Like, there's just something so beautifully grounding and reflective and space giving about minding. So
thank you for sharing that bit of your own story too. I do think that's another way that teachers become different as teachers, is they end up with a child they didn't expect to have to parent. And that shifts every single thing about how they relate to children in general. That's a very common story that I hear as well. I'm always so grateful when that's offered. So thank you for sharing that. I like the word minding. It may not be perfect. I may decide I don't like it 2 years from now, but I'm trying to build a habit of mind, right? In young people, in people. And that is to, like, I'm trying to think of a substitute for the word mind, but like, mind yourself, right? Like, okay, so you hear loud and clear that like self-accountability is a very high priority for me. Like, people who can admit their mistakes and take responsibility for them and then work to change those patterns of behavior to be in better relation to other people. I think that you have to like mind yourself to be able to do any of that, right? So it's a kind of I'm trying to shift everything away from thinking about your own self toward instead thinking about other people. And like, that's my major beef with punishment, is it like incentivizes people to try to protect themselves from punishment. So it's like more selfishness, right? It's more like I'm not minding the impact of my behaviors on others. I'm minding whether or not somebody catches me doing this wrong thing and is going to make me suffer, right? It's just a wrong kind of conditioning. So when I think about what's the opposite of that selfish conditioning, to me, it's like learning to be thoughtful to others. And to me, that means minding how I behave in shared space, minding how the things that I do might hurt somebody around me. And it's not, especially when we're in crisis or we don't have our basic needs met, it is not our instinct to be thinking about others. And that's not bad. It's just not sustainable for a healthy world where people are actually going to be okay, right? I actually keep on trying also to push this point around like freedom is a responsibility, not a right. You will never be free if I continue to violate every possibility of your being. So I have to mind myself to even ensure the first level of possibility of somebody else having a world to live in that is like safe or reasonable or anything. So I can't think of a better way, but yes, to me, it's different than watching. It's different for all kind of reasons. I can't think of a better word besides like mind, just like build a habit of self-reflection, right? A habit of watching yourself from the outside and thinking, how am I presenting through my behaviors right now? Who am I helping? Who am I harming? I think kids can practice that, and that practicing it early and consistently throughout their educational experience would really allow us to have a different world than the world we have now, which is mind my instructions, mind me as the authority, mind yourself and your own academic success. Like all of that is getting us the world we have now, which is violent, it is unsustainable, it is poison to our children. They don't see a lot of examples or models of people minding their impact. So I am thinking hard about like cultivating in kids seeds of a mindfulness that's not about Zen self-care only, though that's part of it, but is a mindfulness about the impact of who I am on this world and on others. And if everybody is doing that, then my needs are going to be met too.
Awesome. Well, cool. Thank you, Carla. Catherine, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Catherine. I just had a question. You talked about balancing safety and control and then accountability versus punishment, but how do you balance safety and accountability in the classroom specifically?
So say more about what you're thinking.
Yeah, no, you're good. Specifically, like, how do you make sure that you're keeping your kids safe while also holding them accountable to that freedom? Like, how do you make sure that when you're allowing them to practice their skills, that they feel safe, like that other students feel safe?
Yeah, they're not always going, they're not always going to feel safe, right? Which are this is the situation we find ourselves in now. So if your question is, are there certain behaviors that are so physically, urgently dangerous that that behavior needs to be addressed first in some other way? I'm not sure if that's kind of what you're getting at.
Not really, but yeah.
Because I kind of think that was the whole thing. I was like, your question is sort of the whole thing that I was trying to work on, right? Like is exactly how you think about defining safety in a way that is almost synonymous with self-accountability.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you kind of answered it when you talked about like there are going to be situations where there is not that felt safety, if that makes sense.
Are you thinking about a particular
situation? No, just in general.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, if that's an unsatisfactory answer, if you could think about, a different way to
No, you're good.
Back. Okay, love.
I'm going to put myself in the queue. Oh no, Kenzie's here. I'll ask my question real quick, Kenzie. I apologize. Only because I so appreciated how you scaffolded those posters in the language, both for younger kids, like elementary level, and then also for your high schoolers, both in sophistication and the implications. And I was really wondering how you actually see those systemic changes manifest in the goals that you have for full human being for kids. So how do you see those changes manifest in their interpersonal behavior, right? In their relationship to school and relationship to adults, or even, their attitudes towards outside the school, what they accept in the world and kind of how they are out there. How do you see that manifesting in those different age levels of kids that you've worked with?
Tiny things, and I have to like search hard. Right? Like if there's any kind of assumption that any of it is going smoothly, it's not. like they're very frustrating day in and day out, right? I'm like, what are we doing? Why is everybody being bad? It's like, I just want to be honest that it's like, all of these inputs, and do I all day, every day be like, wow, we've really created an alternative learning environment here? No, like, it's rowing a canoe up a waterfall. That is the experience. And I accept that and I like it. Why? Because why would I think that trying to condition people 100% differently than the world conditions them now would be like quick or easy or smooth, right? And why would I think that creating a different, safe, human world would be like an easy undertaking for any of us? It's not. And so I like that it doesn't work. Like, I at least know that it's better than the not working we have now, which is also abusive, right? The not working we have now that also teaches shame, teaches humiliation, feeds the policing, feeds the prison, feeds exclusion. That's not working either, right? It's not like we have, orderly learning environments everywhere anyway. So I would say on a daily basis, the behaviors I'm seeing are no worse than I would be seeing if we weren't trying. Secondly, yeah, we've been open 3 years, right? So all of it is new in a number of ways, but like with this long game is no joke for me. Like I work specifically on a P20 campus. It's like we have a preschool, we have an elementary school, we have a middle and high school. We hold on to our kids, we wrap around our kids for that whole timeline. And every time I'm like, good heavens, I've gotten exactly 0 progress with this kid in a whole year. I don't have to stress about it because I'm like, I got 15 more years with this kid. And I 100% know, because I've seen it in my own parenting, that I say a lot of things that don't land, all kind of things that are like whoosh in one ear out the other, and they go and they act exactly the opposite of how I've just instructed them to act. And then 5-6 years later, I'm like, oh my goodness, finally some shred of evidence that something in them is like flourishing in a direction that I had dreamed and hoped, right? Like they're still jerky a lot of the time, but then I see a seed of something so extraordinary that I know would not have happened without that consistent faith, input, stay on message, don't give up, don't feed the things I don't want to feed, right? So it's the same way with kids. Am I going to get there in a year with every kid? No. I could, of course, tell a million stories, though. I can tell stories of success. If I do it, you're going to think they're corny and that I've made them up because they're that beautiful, right? Like interactions between kids that I think are really world-changingly different. Moments where kids are taking responsibility and making apology in ways I've never seen anybody in my life be able to do. So of course I have 1,000 stories like that. They just all sound so fake because they really are. And I don't want to give the impression that like that happened and then it was all sweet after that. Like kids do that one day, the next day they're a complete a-hole. Like that's like the reality of human nature, is that that's how progress is. That's how learning is. That's how growth is. That's how our mental health is, our well-being, whether we are well-fed, whether we are well-rested. How well we can act on any given day is a combination of so many elements that I don't expect linear progress. What I do is look every single day for some small moment of something that can keep me hopeful, can keep me believing. And it is never hard to find that in any age, whether I'm spending the day at the high school or the preschool or at the elementary. There's never a day that passes where, with or without these inputs, I'm not seeing something magical that kids do that we could lift and be really. And so that's how I also try to keep our new teachers invested in continuing to teach. It's not what you thought. There is a gigantic gap between what you thought the job was going to be and what it actually is. And so searching for those small moments of like, this thing that I'm doing, 80% of my day is complete nightmare, but this 20% that happened today was like not small. It was not small what happened. And if I can lift that 20% for kids, the power of naming it and being explicit about the magic that happened in that 20%, I really do believe in that being the way that things shift. But yeah, I have a very low expectations for people's capacity to change overnight, no matter their age. And I think that's healthy and measured and realistic, while also being hopeful and believing in something you haven't yet really seen, and just knowing another world is possible, even if I haven't had the chance to experience it and probably won't myself. I just want it for the 3-year-old. I want a different world for her than I have had the chance to experience. So that's where I find hope, even though I'm deeply realistic and practical about the challenges.
You know, if we weren't talking in the context of school, I would swear you're describing parenting, but it sounds very similar. Kenzie, go ahead. Sorry for budging you there.
No worries. No, I think you took me on a journey of a lot of things from the proverbial quote of, do we build the world that we want to live in, or do we live in the world that we live in? And I think there is also that aspect of like, you will frequently get the comment of like, well, this isn't the way the real world works, which like who even knows what we're referring to there. But I think in that, like, there is unschooling of yourself or unschooling of kids involved in all of this work too. But I was specifically looking at like the rupture and repair, which has been in my practice one of the most meaningful, also challenging things. And I was wondering if you have any examples of, because in there you're talking about the co-creation and how everything is a little bit your fault and also not, and how we balance those two things. But also looking at how you involve kids in that practice and what your thoughts are in doing, you know, some of these like different practices, whether they be like student panels for behavior and things like that. Like, I was just curious what your processes have been involving kind of like larger community into the work of repair, and acknowledging that repair is usually not like a one or two person game. It's usually a larger community issue as well. Yeah.
I love this question. I mean, I'm going to give you an answer and it's going to make you wildly uncomfortable, as it makes every teacher wildly uncomfortable. But like, and I will say, there is a foundation, like you do build a foundation of love first, where it's like, okay, I'm going to say some things about you that are true and about kids, you know, and I'm going to say them in front of the whole class because we're all going to talk about you right now and things that you're doing. And so I'm not saying do this on day one when there's no relationships established, X, Y, and Z, right? So don't just take the strategy without the context. But that said, yeah, 1,000 times I sit in classrooms, especially the new teachers that I coach, pull the kids together and I'm like, we're going to just, this is about you, you know, you one kid. You've been doing this shit all year. And now we are 3 months in. Let us please notice that you are lonely and you don't have friends. Why don't you have friends? Because people don't want to be around you. Why don't people want to be around you? Because of X, Y, and Z behavior. So you're going to sit here and you're going to listen to us name for you the challenges that you are bringing and the reasons why it's very hard to be friends with you. And that's going to be hard. And of course, there's preparation I do with that kid first, and there's preparation that I'm doing with the class first. So again, please don't take like this 2-minute answer that I'm going to give you and think there's not a lot of work that makes this possible. But yeah, my ultimate goal in every classroom is to get to the point where that conversation is possible, especially because there are those, like, it's such a chicken and egg between kids who are feeling lonely and no sense of belonging and bad behavior, right? Those things go together so often for me. I've like established that 1,000 times over, that the root of so much of that behavior is a lack of a sense of belonging. Yet you make yourself very difficult to be around, right? So as you can see, I'm like quite honest, right? In the same way I'm talking to you right now is how I talk to kids, and I don't care how old they are. Like, you are doing things that make people not want to be around you. You can actually choose differently, and then people would want to be around you, and you have your whole life to think about how to make different kinds of decisions. And you have the opportunity to talk to us about why it's been hard for you to be able to do those things, why it's been able for you to change those behaviors, what we are doing that is making things worse. And in the course of those conversations, I'm always like, and Victoria, you make it worse, right? Why? Because you know he gets mad easily, and yet you go and make him mad. Why? If he gets mad easily, don't make him mad. Why are you doing that? Right? Like, but this conversation publicly, not between these two. And I'm like, you're a trigger for him. Why do you always come for him? This is why he doesn't like you, and why this situation makes things infinitely worse, right? And the other kids are sitting there like, yeah, They all already know it. So I'm saying 0 things that any kid of any age hasn't already 100% noticed, especially because they're with each other day in and day out. They know those things better than we do. Trusting them to have an honest conversation where they're saying to this kid, yeah, we're willing to do X, Y, and Z to not trigger and make things worse, but you also have to like give a little. Those are the kind of relational, I want them to be healthy adults in relationships where they can be with each other in this way and say, look, I'm simultaneously going to give you a chance and I'm going to draw a boundary if you don't make any effort to change. If you don't make any effort to change, I'm not going to be friends with you. That is fair and reasonable, right? What is the actual evidence of an effort to change? We're going to name those things so that we're not abstractly deciding this person hasn't tried. We're going to name by the end of that conversation, what is evidence of him trying to change the behavior? And when kids make boundaries around their, I'm not like, no, everybody should be friends. No, they should not everybody be friends. Why? It's okay and healthy to draw a boundary around someone who's behaving in a way that is causing you anguish and not making any effort to change, right? So those are healthy conversations that I hope support them in their lives, and having them around the whole class is useful for so many reasons, including that some kids are very smart at this set of skills. They're very naturally good at it. And so if I can model how I move in that conversation, and these kids who are naturally kind of skilled in the same things see that model, they're so close to being able to do it themselves that they quickly learn how to do it themselves. Now, I don't have to be the holder of that space. Like those highly skilled kids are often able to hold those circles themselves, especially in, you know, 2nd grade and up. So those are all the benefits to doing it, treating it as a public problem rather than it's this one kid or it's these 2 kids together. Like dealing with it as a public health problem gives us different opportunities to develop skills, to see where are our gifts in this area so that we can figure out which kids are really good at holding these kinds of spaces, which kids need the most work in being able to do this. But those are kids don't really want to change for the adult typically. They're more willing to change to make friends and to be accepted by their peers. So engaging their peers in naming for them what they need to do to be more of a useful, positive, productive community member is usually much more motivating for a kid of any age than an adult telling them things they don't care about, really.
Awesome. I'll gladly defer to anybody else if they have a final question here. I suppose kind of in that vein as we're wrapping up in the last couple of minutes. Carla, where are you drawing inspiration from now? Like what is motivating you? What are you reading, listening, connecting with? What's kind of keeping you going headed into a long August and headed into the fall?
Okay, so currently I'm reading, like, I think it's called What It Takes to Heal. It's like transforming yourself to transform the world. It's Prentice Hemphill, I think, is just out. That book I like. I like a book by Ruha Benjamin that just came out too on imagination. I really like that book. So those are things I read. But honestly, I was feeling rock bottom before getting back in and working directly with kids. Like even when just working with teachers, but removed from kids, I was not doing well. Or feeling like I could keep going in this work at all. So corny answer, but 100% true. If I didn't have concrete examples in everyday life of seeing things with kids be different, I don't think I could keep going. There's no amount of reading. You know, it took me 15 years to write my dissertation. Like, because I did not like to do that. I did not enjoy that as an activity. Like reading and writing in isolation, it was stupid, right? So I do read and I do like engage in things, right? But I will say none of those are things that inspire me. They're content knowledge for me, right? Like it's actual new learning for me, which I need, but it doesn't inspire me. The only thing that inspires me is like the day-to-day getting to literally see kids be better than us. That gives me a lot of the only hope. And even then, I'm like, is this enough for me to keep going? Because this is a very hard world right now. I feel very in anguish over this world right now. So I don't think I could do anything without being with young children and young people right now.
Yeah, it's the biggest antidote to hopelessness and everything else. No, that's a great way to end here. So huge thanks again, Dr. Carla Shalaby, for joining us, for sharing, you know, your work, for sharing your worlds, for sharing everything, and just being so open and honest about the lack of utopianism in here, right? This work is hard. You're going to have setbacks every single day. And that's the reality of doing the right work at the right time with the right people. So I'm so thankful for you to join us today. I will, before we send our attendees off, hopefully we're looking at the Wednesday schedule here. But we've got a little bit of a break. Feel free to, we can always bring this conversation back into the Discord. Again, sharing of resources, sharing of thoughts, reactions, anything that you want to bring from the Zoom chat, which I have just so appreciated how bustling that space has been. Bring that energy into the Discord for the next hour. We'll do separate learning track sessions again. So Trevor's group will meet with Trevor. Abir's group will meet with Abir. Tomorrow, it'll be awesome to bring those two forces back together like we did yesterday. Then we'll hear from Vaughn Cleary and his work with Assumption College in Australia, designing for student agency in scheduling. We'll visit Clark Street Community School. We'll have an awesome educator panel with Mel and Josh from What Schools Could Be. And then tonight, again, we've had Cass and Cornelius as incredible, engaged, active participants in today's session, but we'll get to meet up in the thought sanctuary and bring that mindfulness with us there too. So thank you all again for this time. Thank you so much, Carla, and we'll see you all soon for those learning journey sessions. Take care all.